Welcome back to 30 Days of Lightroom, and in this video we're focusing on black and white images. How do you turn your images black and white? How do you edit black and white images? And maybe most importantly is, when should you turn an image black and white or leave it full color? We have all of that to look forward to in this video, so let's jump right into it. So I have some images here of the Thunderbirds that I took this past summer. Let's click this little arrow over here to bring back our whole tool set over on the right hand side here. And you can see up in Profile, it says Adobe Monochrome. I'll show you guys how to do that. And it's important to know that there are probably 3, 4, maybe 5 ways to turn your image black and white in Lightroom, and we will go over all of those today. So I'm going to hit V on the keyboard. The letter V is in Victor, and you can see our color comes back. So let's talk about some of the ways we can turn our image black and white. So one of the first ways, if you look over here on the right hand side in the basic toning tab, we have the option for treatment of color or black and white. That is one way we can turn our image black and white, and you'll see we lose our vibrance and saturation for editing our hues. Also, we lose our HSL and it turns to black and white. Let's go back to color. We can also hit the letter V on the keyboard. V as in Victor. We can hit it again to bring our color back. We can also turn our saturation all the way down, or we can turn that back up. You'll notice if you turn vibrance all the way down, you're not quite losing all of your color. You're losing all the vibrance from your image, but you're not losing all of your hues, and you're not getting a pure black and white image. So that is how you can turn your image into a black and white image. You can also, one more thing, go up to Profile here and select Monochrome. Now Adobe has a couple different built-in black and white profiles that you can use, so changing your profile is the last way that we can change our image into a black and white image. So let's talk a little bit about editing a black and white image. Black and white is very similar to color, other than obviously having color. You can see up in our histogram here, we lose all of our color when we go from color to black and white, and we just see a very simple curve of our tones, kind of a bell curve here. So that is one thing to notice when you're in black and white, and we can do all of the same things, obviously, we can with a color image. We can affect our exposure, our contrast, highlight, shadows, blacks, presence, and obviously we lose our vibrance and saturation. We can also go down and play with our tone curve, but you will notice that your HSL, your hue, saturation, and luminance sliders will turn to black and white. And that is one of the different things you can do with a black and white image. You can affect the colors of the image. You can see there's no red in this image, so I'm not really doing anything. I know I have some heavy blues, so let's mess with our aquas. Turn the brightness of our aquas down. You can see a lot of grain popping up in the image. Can turn those up. Also see a lot of grain coming out. Let's look at our blues. That looks kind of cool, but we're kind of crunching our image, and I see a lot of grain and noise popping up. I don't like that. If we turn it up, that's a little bit too much. I'm seeing a lot of noise. So be careful with your black and white mix. You can also use your targeted adjustment tool to select specific tones in your image and play with those. Moving your targeted adjustment tool, clicking, dragging up and down will adjust your hues. I'm going to go ahead, double click, reset that whole box, close that out. Just know that is an option to you. You can also click auto and let it kind of choose for itself what it sees as the best contrast and the best looking image. I typically like to do everything by hand, but let's go ahead. We'll turn that off. Close this tab. The tone curve now is something I heavily rely on in black and white images. Contrast is extremely important in black and white images. So you will see I often bring down my shadows, pop up my highlights a little bit. You can see the before, kind of flat, and the after. We'll zoom out to about 50% here. You can see the before and the after of this, just adding a lot of contrast, because that's one thing that you see more of in black and white images is contrast, texture, and detail. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the letter V on the keyboard. Pay attention to the noise in the image. You really don't see a ton of noise in the image unless you're zoomed in to 100%, because we have a lot of color to distract our eye. You also don't see a lot of these dust specks. They kind of get lost in the image. Now if I go ahead and hit V on the keyboard again, see our black and white image. Now we can see a lot of things like, look at all these dust specks popping up here. I couldn't see these in my original color image. I also couldn't see as much noise, and I really didn't see as much contrast. So that is one thing to pay attention to when you're taking an image from color to black and white. And we'll do another example here. This photo looks pretty good. I'm going to hit V on the keyboard, and now I'm starting to see some more texture, some of these dust specks right here, any other dirt or anything that's on my sensor or my lens. But I see a lot more texture, and I think my subject really pops out because there's that contrast between the white trail, the bluish cloudy sky, and my jet right here. So all things to be thinking about when you're turning your image from color to black and white. So one last thing I would like to hit on is our presence tab, and I have a whole video on the presence tab, texture, clarity, and dehaze. Now these are some pretty cool tools when you start getting into black and white, but as I always caution in my videos, be very careful. A little bit goes a long way. You can see right now I don't have these sliders maxed out to 100, and there's a reason why. Let's go back to this first image. Actually, let's pick a whole new image to edit. Here we go. This is a very contrasty looking image. I really like the very bright white clouds, the dark blue in the sky, and I really love to emphasize that contrast. As I said before, one way to do that again is to really bring down your black slider, really bring up your white slider, make those contrasty tones really pop out here, and you can see your histogram will spread out a little bit as you start adding that contrast to your image. That looks really good. So again, let's talk about presence, texture, clarity, and dehaze. Now, black and white, as I said before, really emphasizes that noise that's in your image. And one thing you need to do is emphasize that sharpness just a little bit. So I add sharpening to every digital image that I take, and sometimes texture just makes it pop a little bit more. You will get some of that noise like I discussed in my presence tab video, but I like to add just a little bit of texture. We can also see that clarity makes our image pop just a little bit, kind of brings some more darker tones, makes the white tones pop out, and kind of adds that mid-tone contrast to our image. But remember when I said don't take this slider to 100? That's just a little bit too much for me. Maybe you like that kind of artistic, gritty look, but I personally don't like to take that to 100. I'll bring it back a little bit here. And same with dehaze. You can do some really cool artistic things. You can add haze, make your image very flat, or dehaze your image, take away that haze, and add some contrast. And there's a lot you can do with this. Again, you can take it what I think is overboard. You might like this. You might think this looks pretty cool. We can go ahead and we can full screen this image. Take this full screen. This looks pretty cool. I just hit the letter F on the keyboard to make it full screen, but I really like the way this looks. I think it's a bit too much. I'm going to hit Escape on the keyboard, go back to our Lightroom interface here. I think it looks pretty good. It's just a touch too much for my taste. I'll bring that dehaze down a little bit, and then I might come in here, mess with the shadows, and it's all about making those minor tweaks to make your tones really pop. So now that we've talked about editing our image, let's talk a little bit about when should you make an image black and white, or when should you leave it color. I'm going to hit the letter V on the keyboard again, bring this image back to color, and one of the reasons I chose this particular image is because of the contrast in the tones. I'm going to hit backslash on the keyboard so you can see the original photo. This is the original RAW before I made any toning edits. I will hit backslash again, and we brought back our edited image. You can see I've added some contrast to this image, but in real life, this was a very contrasty image. I really just brought that out in the edit. You can see the very dark storm clouds, the highlights on the edges of the storm clouds, the very bright parts of the white plains, and the very dark parts of the bottom of the plain. So there was a lot of contrast and a wide variety of tones, lots of lights and highlights, and lots of shadows and darks in this image. So when I made it black and white, it came out very contrasty and really emphasized those jets up against the clouds. So that's typically one thing I look for, is contrast and potential contrast to emphasize when I'm going to make an image black and white. Let's take a look at some of the other images we have here. You can see I've already made some black and white. If we go ahead and hit that right here, let's make these images just a little bit larger. We'll close this editing window to our right and kind of full screen this for right now. So you can see this image, if I hit V on the keyboard, was a very contrasty silhouette. We had very dark blacks, and we had some nice midtones, some nice shadows, and up here we even had a little bit of highlights to kind of contrast in the cloud. So if we go back, hit V on the keyboard, that is a very, I think, nice black and white image. I love the tones in this image. So let's go ahead, let's look at a few more. I'm gonna go ahead and click this image. I like the way this shot turned out. Let's hit V on the keyboard, black and white. Now that's okay. There's definitely some contrast. There's some white here. There's a lot of midtones right here. And if we bring back our histogram, we can see a lot of our image kind of takes place in this highlight zone with our highlights and kind of mid-tone-ish tones. So it's a very flat image, even if it's black and white. I probably wouldn't make this image black and white because I think the color contrast between the dark blues, the red, the light blues, kind of these off-whites right here, I think that adds a lot to the image, and I don't necessarily want to lose that, and I don't think I'm necessarily gaining anything here by making this image black and white. Let's take a look at a couple more photos that I have here of the Thunderbirds. Go ahead and take this image. We can see they're pretty far away. They're up against the mountains. Let's hit V on the keyboard. Now, what do you guys think? Do you think this works as a black and white image? I'm kind of 50-50. I like the fact that we can see the mountains here. We can see these hills here that were hit by a forest fire a long time ago, so they look kind of dead. There's not much going on in this image. I can really crank the contrast here, but I'm not really gaining much. Overall, I think this is kind of a boring image that I took. It could be much better, but I don't think black and white really helps. So go through some of your photos, hit the letter V on the keyboard. You're not doing any damage and you're not losing anything. You're not losing your edits. So just experiment, hit V on the keyboard, check out which photos of yours look good or may not look so good in black and white. And you can kind of judge for yourself what you like to see in images for black and white. This is kind of a flatter image, but I definitely do like the fact that I can see these dark tones in the jets, the very bright sky, and kind of these mid-tone trails behind the jet. I really hope you learned a little more about black and white in Lightroom, how to make your images black and white, how to do some tweaks and bring out that contrast, and of course, when should you make your images black and white. Here's another example of one that it works in black and white, it works in color, but I would prefer the color over the black and white. The color adds something to the image. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you learned something, please hit that like button and subscribe. Share this video with a friend that may be learning Lightroom, and until next time, get out and go shoot.